There's been a trend towards nostalgia in the past few years, harkening back to the late 2000s and early 2010s, a time when the Nintendo DS was at its peak and was indeed considered the pinnacle of all ages gaming. It's what today's young adults grew up on and thus look back on with perhaps excessive fondness. Nintendo has for its part been pretty shameless about porting and remaking many of its popular titles from this period, most recently Paper Mario: The Thousand Year Door, and doing a commendable job at least fitting these double-screen originals into a sharp single-screen format. One surprising addition to this lineup of childhood makers was Ghost Trick, a puzzle game that made ample use of the DS's two screens. Yet its addition to the growing library of games available on the Nintendo Switch was met with no less excitement than surprise. It is, as I've heard it, a classic. Maybe not a mainstream hit like Pokemon Diamond and Pearl, but one which was beloved by virtually everyone who played it. Since I seem to have stumbled into a habit of picking up games for the first time just as they get remade, I endeavored to find out why. I learned that Ghost Trick isn't just any puzzle game. It's a fast-paced mystery that treats death itself as equal parts comedy and tragedy. And now I understand the appeal baked into its very premise. If you've already died, what's left for you to do but figure out why? Ghost Trick opens with a mysterious death on the otherwise quiet outskirts of a junkyard. A man in a snazzy red suit wakes up from what should have been an eternal slumber to find that he doesn't remember where he is, how he got there, or even who he is. All he has is a name, Sissel. Luckily, a ray of light shines down to clear up his confusion. That is, a literal desk lamp calling himself Ray tells Sissel not to despair because he can do something about all of this. No, not reversing his own death, that would be too easy. However, he has been granted unique paranormal powers that allow him to influence the world of the living, very subtly called ghost tricks. Oh. With these ghost tricks, he is able to possess and manipulate nearby objects, as well as to turn back time up to 4 minutes preceding the moment of someone's death. Of course, this is immediately relevant, because if Sissel doesn't act, his death won't be the only one to occur that night. At that very moment, a young woman is lying dead in that same junkyard, having been shot just minutes before. Sissel must test his new powers by reversing time to 4 minutes before her death and MacGyver a solution that will take her killer, one of several paid hitmen as it turns out, out of the picture. In doing so, he communicates with her soul and is able to find out who she is. Unlike him, she's able to remember almost everything. Her name is Lynn, and she's a police detective. She came to the junkyard in the first place looking for leads on a case. What's more, she had come to meet Sissel specifically because he had contacted her to say that he knew something. But neither of their problems are so easily resolved. Lynn, despite ostensibly being a witness to Sissel's murder before her own, doesn't remember anything about it, and Sissel doesn't remember anything, least of all what Lynn wants to know. Thus, the two of them agree to an alliance based on their mutual lack of information. Sissel is in a hurry because Ray informed him that he doesn't have much time. Ghosts can't last more than a night after their demise, so come dawn, Sissel will cease to exist. Although he makes a very fast peace with that, he can't stand the thought of disappearing without knowing how and why he was killed. Clearly that mystery and whatever Lynn is looking for are related somehow. So, the two go on to spend an all-nighter untangling a thread of information that runs much deeper than they can imagine. This conspiracy is one entrenched in international politics. Of course, the Ghost Trick writers were sage enough not to actually name the countries involved or base them off of real ones to any obvious degree. You can tell the foreigners apart because they have blue skin, but don't worry about that too much. It was a foreign official lounging in a cushy office somewhere who ordered the hit on Lynn, as Sissel finds out by possessing telephone lines to travel from place to place. This diminutive old man wants to erase any remnants of Temsic, and Lynn is one of them. In order to ensure she dies, he's hired 3 hitmen, one of whom has gone to wait at her apartment in case she manages to escape the other 2. Alarmed by this, Sissel rushes to Lynn's home phone only to find her not there. Instead, he finds a little girl bound and gagged on the floor, a gunman watching the window, and the body of a small dog. This marks the introduction of the best boy ever, Missile! Heinous as it is to murder a friendly little dog like him, his death is important here because it serves as a springboard to send Sissel back in time. By averting Missile's death, he is able to thus avert those of Lynn and the girl living with her, Camilla. He doesn't know it yet, but Camilla is part of the key to solving his own mystery too. Her father is at the center of the case Lynn is trying to solve, and like Sissel, his time is limited. Detective Jowd is in prison for the alleged murder of his wife, Alma. It is a murder for which he turned himself in, along with what he claimed was the murder weapon. Stranger still is that when Sissel first finds him, he is painting a picture of what he calls the last face he wants to remember. It is not the face of his late wife or his daughter, blotted out in the photographs that decorate his cell, but the face of Sissel himself. Sissel wants an answer to this, but Lynn can provide none when asked. She is more concerned with evidence that Jowd is to be quietly executed for his past crime at midnight. She can't let this stand because she's certain Jowd didn't actually do it. She just needs to be able to prove it, but there will be no point if he's killed before she can exonerate him. Sissel's next task is to sabotage Zhao's execution and delay it until Lin can find the evidence necessary to get him pardoned, so he must once again race against time and put aside the growing number of questions in his mind. Why is this case so important to Lin? What is his own significance to Zhao? And what is he to do now that Lin is on the run from her own trusted mentor, Inspector Cabanela, for what seems to be damning evidence that she was the one who killed Sissel, a crime she can't remember committing? By shorting the power in the prison, Sissel is able to break Zhao out, but to no avail. Cabanela catches up to and mercilessly holds his old friend and rival at gunpoint because regardless of his personal feelings, he can't break the law. Other characters astutely note that Cabanela's spotless white coat is symbolic of his career and the example he sets to others. The more powerful a man becomes, the more sets of eyes he gets on him. Thus, the higher Cabanela has climbed in the ranks, the less he can afford to make any mistakes. He refuses to do anything that would cause a scandal to stain his otherwise squeaky clean record. This seems to others cold, even heartless. An indignant Lin has, despite the accusations lingering around her, gone straight to the justice minister to demand Zhao be pardoned, or at least have his execution delayed. It was this same minister who signed the execution order in the first place, so he should be able to reverse it. Here, however, his hands are tied. He's been informed that his daughter has been kidnapped, and unless he wants anything to happen to her, he must ensure that Zhao's execution is completed tonight. Finding Lin unable to calm the increasingly frantic man, Sissel must once again slip through the wires to solve this problem. He finds it much different than what he'd anticipated. The kidnapped girl is not the minister's daughter, but Camilla, now being held hostage in her childhood home. What stands out to Sissel here, besides the desiccated state of the house, is that it is fitted with a set of familiar mechanisms. They are, in fact, an exact replica of the Rube Goldberg machine that sits in the basement of the junkyard superintendent's office. Or rather, the one in the junkyard was built to mimic this one. Sissel can't determine the reasoning behind it, nor can he save Camilla before she's whisked away once again by her captors. But he does find out one crucial truth. Zhao, as Lin believed, did not kill Alma. 5 years ago, Camilla had built this machine on Alma's birthday in order to surprise and delight her mother. It didn't work as intended. Something interfered and caused a gun, not before a part of the machine, to fire on Alma. Zhao came home to find his daughter crying and his wife dead. Distraught though he was, he couldn't let whatever had happened that night come to light for fear it would incriminate Camilla, and so he turned himself in. He did leave one important clue behind though, the music box in Lin's and Camilla's apartment, which Camilla was supposed to deliver to Lin. This box, in which Zhao had hidden the real murder weapon, was the key to proving his innocence. Sissel's next destination is Temsic Park, where Camilla stashed the music box just before she was kidnapped. There he finds not just the box, but another pair of bodies. An outspoken hippie who'd been protesting a coming housing development, and Missile, who had escaped his apartment to run after Camilla only to be hit by the kidnapper's motor scooter. What's more, Missile has his own set of ghost tricks up his sleeve, or in his paws as it were. He can extend his reach farther than Sissel can to swap objects of the same shape. He did this to prevent Camilla from being crushed by a large, ominous boulder referred to as the god of Temsic Park. Unfortunately, this had caused the protester to get crushed instead. The two ghosts are able to use their combined tricks to save the man in question, but Missile refuses Sissel's offer to go back in time and reverse his death too. As a ghost, he's sure he is much better equipped to help Camilla, and if it's for her, he's perfectly happy to stay this way. His help does turn out to be important later. The next one with a target on his back is Cabanela, another person who happens to know about the Temsic incident that keeps getting brought up. He had gone to the junkyard superintendent, who behind his disorderly exterior is actually a genius scientist investigating a series of events linked to this Temsic. As it turns out, Temsic is the name of a meteor that had fallen in the park of the same name 10 years before. Wiping out all information concerning this meteor and the circumstances of its arrival is in the clear interests of the foreign parties colluding in the background. But there is someone else who wants everyone involved gone. A man with a distinctive red suit. Sissel sees the culprit behind the murders of Cabanela and Professor Pigeon, and it's just like looking into a mirror. The answers to all of the questions that have arisen throughout the game are rooted in that meteor's landing. Why Lin so desperately wants to save Zhao, why Zhao in turn doesn't want to be saved, why Cabanela is so obsessed with keeping his nose and his coat clean, why Camilla's birthday contraption went haywire and killed Alma, why Sissel himself was killed, and why it appears indisputable that Lin herself killed him. 10 years ago, a young Lin was playing in the park when all of a sudden a man grabbed her and held a gun to her head. This man had been accused of a crime, and to avoid being apprehended, he took Lin as a hostage and threatened to shoot her. Zhao, the officer chasing him, was stuck in this standoff with the man when the Temsic meteor fell. A fragment of it broke off and pierced the man's chest, killing him in the instant that Zhao had seriously considered shooting him. Lin, who had fainted, awoke in Zhao's arms and felt indebted to him for saving her, and so vowed to become a hero like him. However, Zhao thought his own actions cowardly and considered himself all but directly responsible for the man's death. For this reason, when Camilla's birthday plans went horribly wrong 5 years after that, he decided his life might as well be forfeit, and handed himself over to the authorities, no longer caring what happened to him. But Cabanela and Lin both knew there was no way Jowd would do such a thing. The same Cabanela who arrested Jowd again after he'd escaped had been, in his own way, looking out for him all along. The headstrong young Lin believed she could join the force and then gather clues as she pleased, but Cabanela, a shrewd man, knew that setting Jowd free and proving his innocence would require unshakable authority and all of the privileges and all of the danger that came with it. All along, he had risen in the ranks and kept his record spotless so that his friend and rival could eventually be let out of prison. This way, he could conduct his own investigations on the side into a theory he developed with Professor Pigeon. Alma's death and a series of other bizarre incidents pointed to the existence of an unseen manipulator forcing people and objects to do things that normally should have been impossible for them to do. This theory held more water than even he had anticipated. The man in the red suit wasn't dead. Well, he was, but also he wasn't. The Temsik meteor emitted a curious radiation that imbued any recently deceased individuals nearby with supernatural powers. Thus, the fragment embedded in his chest kept him frozen at the moment of his death, not truly alive, but unable to really die. His autopsy had failed because any incisions made on his body healed instantly, and then once he was left alone, he simply got up and walked away. But where can a dead man go? Resentment at his plight stewed over the years, filling him with a determination to see vengeance exacted against everyone he deemed responsible, including Lin, a mere girl at the time. He had approached those foreign officials to make a deal with them. He could use his powers on their behalf, and in exchange, he wanted their help ending the lives of those who had been in Temsik Park on that day. Jowd's execution had been pushed through with this foreign aid, and the undead man had hired the hitmen to deal with Lin himself, knowing that even if they failed, her life would be ruined by undeniable video evidence that she had killed him. Even though the reality was that once his body was carried off for a supposed autopsy, he would just get up and leave. All of this was possible because he could possess not only objects but living things as well, something even Sissel couldn't do. He could force the justice minister to sign the execution order and use a hostage to keep him from reversing it. He could force Lin to shoot his body to frame her, and he could bring a gun into Alma's birthday fanfare and manipulate the mechanism to shoot her. Once he'd left his trail of destruction, he would go meet his foreign allies off the coast, where they'd parked a getaway submarine conveniently hooked up to a subterranean telephone cable. From there, he'd go off to that country to start a new life, in so much as one is able to when they're not truly alive. Or that was the plan anyway. For some reason, he thought it was a good idea to trust the government. These people ultimately considered him a liability, and so when his soul was off pursuing any loose ends, the official plucked the Temsik fragment from the body's chest and ejected himself from the submarine in a smaller vessel, leaving the larger ship to self-destruct afterwards. It was doomed to sink to the bottom of the sea, those still on board, including Lin, the kidnapped Camilla, and Jowd, who had come to rescue her, trapped inside. As the remaining rooms fill with water and Lin begins to despair at her fate, she and Camilla are saved from a watery grave by an unexpected hand pulling her up to a dry spot. The man in the red suit realizes he's been had. He was a fool to work with that foreign state to begin with, or to believe he was on equal footing with them and could use them as they'd used him. Now that all seems lost, he's given up. This apparent doppelganger of Sissel is not Sissel at all. His name is Yomiel, and he worked once as a member of the state's IT department. A national security leak had been blamed on him, and though he had nothing to do with it, he was taken for interrogation anyway. The officer in charge of him was none other than Cabanela, still a rookie at the time. Cabanela has admitted to making two crucial mistakes here, threatening Yomiel during the interrogation and then leaving him by himself when called away. Yomiel escaped to the park, and the rest is history. His lucid confession illuminates how he could have become so twisted over the years. Finding out he was alive in a sense was no comfort. It went without saying that he no longer had a job or anywhere to go, and his fiancée, after hearing he'd been killed, had killed herself in turn. But he did have one thing. In the park, he met a stray black kitten who became his only friend in the world. The cat traveled with him everywhere for 10 years and would have gone with him overseas too. However, when he invited Lin to the junkyard carrying his friend in a case, he found that possessing her was harder than he thought. He couldn't easily overpower her will and force her to shoot him, so the first shot misfired. When the second shot landed, Yomiel possessed the cat's body, intending to leave the crime scene with it when he realized something harrowing. The first bullet had killed it. With his own hands, he'd taken away the only thing he had left, the pet he had affectionately named after his dead fiancée, Sissel. With Yomiel's body practically shouting in bright red letters for someone to find it, Sissel had never even considered that he was a cat all along. Yomiel's old friend ends up putting a stop to his fraught revenge plot, and he does so by pulling off his most daring ghost trick yet. He can use Yomiel's body to go back to 4 minutes before the moment Yomiel died, 10 years ago. This bold move will rewrite the entire timeline, erasing the whole chain of events that led to things becoming so irreversibly terrible in the first place. It comes with risks, but faced with this or a certain international crisis, Sissel has no choice but to rewind time, taking Missile's and Yomiel's souls with him. With their help, he must redirect the meteor's descent away from Yomiel, keep Jowd from firing his gun, and ensure that Lyn remains safe. When all of this is accomplished, time starts to fix itself. In the last few minutes before everything is rewritten, Sissel has one final question that never got answered. Just who was that mysterious desk lamp going by Ray? Ray himself appears to illuminate things. He shows Sissel his true form, that of a wizened yet familiar old Pomeranian. Ray is Missile, come from a different timeline to avert disaster. In his past, he was killed by the hitman who came to Lyn's apartment, as was Camilla. However, his ghost tricks alone weren't enough to change this outcome, no matter how many times he tried. He would later encounter Sissel, struggling to find his identity and the cause of his death. In his desperation to find answers, he spurned Missile's plea for help and left him to try to fix everything himself. Missile's attempts to save the day alone were insufficient. He ended up in much the same place, sinking to the bottom of the sea, leaving behind a cooling trail of bodies he just couldn't revive. He, too, had no choice but to turn back the clock to 10 years before and wait for help to come. For a dog, 10 years was a long time to wait. Yet the elder Missile holds no resentment for Sissel's initial refusal to help, nor for all the years he spent waiting for that fateful night to occur. He proudly declares that that's just what doggies do. He had, in his own way, gotten back at Sissel a bit, too. He had completely made up the rule that ghosts disappear the dawn after their deaths to spur Sissel into action. Everything had taken place in the span of one night, after all, so he had to push him to move fast, and pointed him towards Lyn because he knew that the two of them working together had a chance to fix everything. In doing so, though, that remaining piece of a timeline once overwritten would be overwritten himself. With a heartfelt goodbye, the old dog sees Sissel off towards a brighter future, then disappears. And the future is indeed brighter. The foreign instigators are still present for some reason, but have no ties that would let them cause any large-scale crises. More importantly, Jowd is no longer in prison, and he, Cabanela, and Lyn still have their respected positions in the Force. Alma is alive, living happily with Jowd, Camilla, and Missile in that same house. Yomiel, miraculously still alive after injuries that seemed fatal, served a 10-year prison sentence. The audience sees him on the day of his release, and he is surprisingly happy because he knows he has a fiancée waiting for him. Sissel, of course, is still present, and residual Temsic radiation promises he will be for a long time. Jowd had scooped up that lonely black kitten in the park and taken him home, and now he celebrates Lyn's most recent promotion with his new family. Ghost Trick has the advantage of a moving ending to make it memorable, but that's not all it has. It and story-driven games like it defined Nintendo's market during this period. Although I won't argue that the dual-screen aspect in the very name of the DS is responsible for every interesting creative decision made during this period, it seemed to mark an era of bold experimentation against the known limits of graphics, conventional storytelling, and gameplay mechanics. It was no longer enough for a game to just be fun. It also had to be artistically striking and narratively gripping. People were going to ostensibly be carrying these games around in their pockets wherever they went. How else could children old enough to crave complexity and adults looking for some enrichment during their spare time both be kept coming back to them? Alongside mysteries like Ace Attorney and Professor Layton, Ghost Trick combined a visual novel format with a series of puzzles that fully engaged the console's layout, and the latter has been adapted to the Switch format very well in this regard. What makes the game a truly effective hit regardless of age is that the puzzles can be tricky, but they aren't unsolvable. Puzzle designers for games are always puzzling over how to balance difficulty. It's no fun if you don't even have to use your brain, but making it too complicated will only frustrate players. There weren't many solutions to these segments that I felt were too obtuse. If anything, I was reminded that the game's intended audience is still younger than I am because I ended up overthinking steps that were ultimately obvious. What's more, difficulty progresses in a believable fashion by implementing additional elements to puzzles, Missile's swapping ability for instance, without bloating them. And at the end of the day, if you're still stuck somewhere, a lot of the time Sissel's musings will all but tell you what to do without making you feel like too much of an idiot. Interacting with the environment is obviously a big part of this game, and the attention to detail on a graphical level is genuinely impressive. The cartoonish, somewhat exaggerated movements of both people and objects are translated shockingly well into the limited pixel graphics of the DS's small monitor, and naturally have been scaled up to match modern times. Characterization is expressed fluidly through gestures just as much as speech, with perhaps the most standout example being Inspector Cabanela, who dances onto the screen. The distinctive shapes of the characters themselves make for charming and memorable memorable designs. Additionally, smooth object animation allows for certain, otherwise less intuitive mechanics to come into play. The prime example of this is when Missile becomes an assist character, adding a new dimension to puzzles with his swap ability. Being able to switch objects that are the same shape seems straightforward at first, but players will find that they have to watch cutscenes carefully to see how the shape of objects, and thus the possibility of interacting with them, totally changes based on their position within the 2D space. This also allows for the gradual organic suspension of disbelief about the cartoon physics that the game sometimes relies on to make certain puzzle solutions possible, which culminate in the ultimate defiance of space and time themselves at the end of the game. The colorful atmosphere, clean humor, and simple, no-fluff narration suggest, along with the T rating, that the game is intended for younger people. Kids, too, have a right to think seriously and unseriously about death. But another thing that gives adults who either replay it years later or try it for the first time further intrigue is the thorough attention to symbolism. Although the game's setting doesn't parallel real-life Japan, its Japanese make is evident in its frequent references to Shinto and Japanese Buddhism. The 4-minute time limit imposed on Sissel for each puzzle is important because the Japanese word for 4, shi, is read the same way as the character for death. In fact, Chinese and Japanese superstition regards 4 as a highly unlucky number due to this association, and tall buildings will often skip the 4th floor for the same reason American buildings will skip the 13th. Sissel's name, too, is a reference to death. Shiseru literally means to die in Japanese, and that is in fact what he does. He could be considered especially ill-fated because he's a black cat, but it should be noted that in Japan, a black cat crossing one's path is a good omen. Although Sissel himself dies at the beginning, he goes on to avert disaster by crossing the paths of the people connected to this incident and changing their fates. And fate is a major motif in Ghost Trick as well. Temsik, the name of the meteor that changed everyone's lives, is Kismet backwards. Kismet is a word of Arabic origin that means fate, though often has associations with undesirable outcomes. There is further religious significance in the other main characters' names. Yomiel is the name of a leader of fallen angels from the Book of Enoch, an ancient apocryphal text that describes orders of angels not seen in canonical biblical texts. This particular angel is referenced because Yomi is also the name of the Japanese underworld, and Yomigaeru is a verb that means to resurrect, or more literally, to return from the land of the dead, which is essentially what Yomiel does in the story. Lin and Camilla are treated as sister figures in the game, with names derived from the central Buddhist concept of reincarnation. Rinne is the Japanese word for samsara, the Buddhist cycle of death and rebirth which traps all mortal souls yet to obtain enlightenment. Although Camilla could be spelled with a K to invoke kami, spirits who are venerated in Shinto, her name in the Japanese version of Ghost Trick is actually Kannon. This may well be a reference to the Kannon worshipped in Japanese Buddhism as a bodhisattva, someone who could escape samsara on their own but chooses not to out of a compassion for and a desire to guide other living beings towards enlightenment. This would also be fitting because her fate is tied to Missile. It is Missile's theme that plays whenever she appears, and they are often on screen together anyway. Additionally, although Missile could have been saved from death a second time, he chooses to remain as a ghost in order to save others in Sissel's timeline. He is especially concerned with protecting Camilla, and his unfaltering loyalty to her is so powerful that in the fraught timeline Ray comes from, he patiently waits to act as a guide in the hopes the others will be more successful than he was. It is only when the crisis is resolved that he is able and willing to leave the world and the cycle of destruction that took his life behind. Of course, I couldn't discuss Missile without also mentioning that he is named after director Shu Takumi's own Pomeranian. It is not the first time a dog called Missile has featured in a game Takumi directed, as there is a Shiba Inu by the same name in the Ace Attorney series. However, the resemblance to Takumi's dog is much clearer in Ghost Trick. I don't know if Takumi has ever stated the exact degree to which he based the character off of the real dog, but it is a lovely homage to have in the game regardless. I bring this up to mourn the passing of Missile the Muse, who unfortunately died at a ripe old age in the summer of 2018. He will get to live on in a likeness just as lovable, and those who play Ghost Trick far into the future will be inclined to agree that he is truly the best boy. Ghost Trick is, in and of itself, a game about cycles. The final puzzle is the piece that fully illuminates this truth. The characters are themselves trapped within a cycle that can only be broken by rescuing people from unfortunate fates. It is a cycle of death brought about by the past regrets of those involved in the Temsik incident. There is Cabanella's regret at having driven Yomiel to do something drastic. There is Joud's regret at the deaths of Yomiel and Alma. There is Camilla's regret at the belief that she killed her mother. And there is Yomiel's regret and resentment that he had lost not just his life, but everything else important to him. It also treats revenge and violence as concepts which are cyclical by nature. It is important that despite the harm he does to others, Yomiel is portrayed as a sympathetic figure. However, his quest for revenge accomplished nothing but the suffering of others, regardless of their involvement in the Temsik incident. He had fallen past the point of no return and was determined to drag others down with him, even knowing how irrational it was. In doing so, he was driven to his own destruction, along with the creation of a diplomatic crisis that could claim untold lives, the deaths of many others, and the murder of his only friend with his own hands. He knew, too, that his actions would not bring Sissel, neither the cat nor his fiancée, back. They would, at best, maybe offer him the chance for a new lease on life. And it is only when he realizes that the foreign officials had no intention of letting him run free with his powers at all that this illusion is shattered. There was no way for him to reclaim some semblance of a normal existence by sacrificing others for it. He realizes his mistakes and he uses the power that only he has, the power to control animate beings, to possess his own still-living body and use it to save Lynn, rather than killing her as he'd first wanted to. By letting go of his obsession and his anger, he is able to find a release from his suffering and prevent such a tragedy from being repeated. You could call the journey that he, Missile, and Sissel all undertake as ghosts a path towards a metaphorical enlightenment. Everyone walks away from this incident a more content and complete version of themselves. By focusing on a cast made up mainly of police officers, the game also addresses the idea that although individuals are responsible for their own actions, they operate within a system in which they are sometimes subject to a fate outside of their control. Yomiel was wrongly accused of something he didn't do and incited to act by police officers. His death was not his own fault, and in a sense, Cabanela and Zhao did bear some of the blame for what happened to him, even if they did not kill him directly. Zhao even falls into a depression when he acknowledges this fact and becomes unable to see himself as any sort of hero of justice. Can you imagine if cops in real life had that kind of integrity about even considering shooting a man dead? Because they too wielded their authority irresponsibly and were quick to resort to violence, Yomiel vowed to pay back this slight tenfold. This included turning the tables on the officers by literally taking control out of their lives in the same way they'd snatched control from him. What Yomiel did wasn't right, but it was behavior symptomatic of someone whom the world had failed. He was not heartless. He was in fact lonely and had raised Sissel because he needed a friend. It is Lynn's character that shines in these moments too. Lynn is stubborn, impulsive, idealistic, and has some truly strange proclivities, but it is because she maintains such a strong sense of justice that she is able to address Yomiel's pain without wavering from her principles in the face of it. More than anything, she feels sorry for him. Yomiel's change of heart can be partially attributed to the fact that Lynn sheds real tears for the man who would have been her killer, because she wishes life had been kinder to him. Although she describes her alliance with Sissel as a selfish one, her desire to help people is real and is why she became a detective in the first place. Lynn, partly by accident and partly by recklessly throwing herself into danger for others, may have the second biggest heart in the game, right behind Missile. I think Ghost Trick's narrative is highly effective as a mystery for a few reasons. The first is that the story is tightly paced on account of taking place within one night. There isn't a lot of room to bring in questions or diversions that won't be addressed. Despite this, it builds tension in a believable way by folding questions into answers right up until the very end, the second facet that makes it a good mystery. It handles a lot of threads at once without any cohesive pattern immediately visible that could weave them all together. Every step Sissel takes forward makes him feel as though he's taken 2 steps back. What should be a simple inquiry into how he died rapidly complicates itself, and complicates Sissel's feelings and goals as well. Even the question of who he is, which he thought was clear right at the beginning, is turned on its head. If I had a nickel for every game in which the amnesiac protagonist unknowingly assumes the form of the major antagonist, I'd have 2 nickels. But it's weird that it's happened twice. The third and perhaps most important part is that no matter how complex the web of mysteries grows, every twist and turn in the story can be traced back somewhere. Skillful foreshadowing is the hallmark of any good mystery, and the foreshadowing in Ghost Trick is no exception. From major flags like the second Rube Goldberg machine in Professor Pigeon's basement and details about Zhao's fellow prisoners, to small details like the fact that Sissel can't read, just about every element introduced in the story is meaningful in some way. Details about Sissel that seem totally inane, like his not knowing what things like ketchup or golf are so comedic in nature that players won't initially think to question them. They're funny, and they're also believable because of Sissel's situation. If he's forgotten who he is, then maybe he just forgot how to read too. It is only when Yomiel makes his appearance that one may start to wonder if, since Sissel is not the man found in the junkyard that night, he is even human at all. Beyond that, the game has a strong understanding of cause and effect. Its mechanics are predicated on experimenting with it. This is demonstrated on a micro level by the object possession component. Manipulating one item will make it possible to do something with another item, and this chain of events can sometimes produce choices that can lead to a dead end and force the player to return to their last checkpoint. You're made to really think about the impact of every action you take. On a macro level, Sissel is defying death and changing fate itself. The deaths of certain characters could at any point spell disaster for everyone, and so Sissel must navigate closely linked events to ensure this doesn't happen. He must also maintain awareness of what will or won't change an immediate result. For instance, he can prevent the Justice Minister from having a heart attack in his office, but he can't force him to reverse Jowd's execution order. He must instead sabotage the electric chair in the prison so that it can't be used at all, therefore buying Jowd time. It is because the game understands change as a ripple in time that I actually have some mixed feelings about the ending. I'm glad that it is a happy one. The story does a good job of making you root for its characters, and so it is gratifying to see that everything turns out alright for them in the end. In terms of following through on the game's ultimate message, that fate can be changed and cycles of destruction can be ended, it could be considered exemplary. I'd want nothing less. However, in order to pull off this grand retcon, it asks players to suspend their disbelief to a much greater extent than it has for the whole game up to that point. Although one may not expect such drastic changes as Ray Bradbury's A Sound of Thunder cites, it is surprising that in the span of 10 years, very little has changed for the characters. Everything happens to pan out exactly as they would have wanted it to. The only unforeseen consequence is Sissel's newfound immortality, a side effect of Temsic radiation. Something that works in this twist's favor is actually the presence of a missile who already tried and failed to change the future. There's more credibility to the idea that things don't always end up right on the first attempt. This elderly missile had one job, and he did it well before bowing out gracefully. It also helps to know that despite the best efforts of everyone involved, this last-ditch effort is the only option left at their disposal. I've thought long and hard about how else the game could have ended. What else could they have done to prevent a catastrophe of global proportions? Nothing short of a Deus Ex Machina could fix their situation. Even if Sissel managed to catch up to the foreigners who'd made off with the Temsic fragment, he'd have to contend against the fate of his friends all sinking to their deaths in a broken submarine. Barring that, he would also be unable to give Yomiel a remotely normal life, or to bring back any of those long dead. From this perspective, I figured that my feelings and the butterfly effect aside, they were fucked. There was no other way to unfuck that situation. Because the raising of the stakes in Ghost Trick is so believable and compelling already, I wouldn't want them to make significant changes to the game up to that point. So I must concede that in this case, the one thing that miraculously solves everyone's problems right at the end is probably the best thing for the game. It is, after all, meant to be a story that feels good. It confronts death directly, sometimes with humor and sometimes with grief, but it is a game about second chances, and so death must not be the end. Most importantly, these second chances are only made possible with the help of others. It is only when Sissel decides to help Missile, when Missile tries to rescue Camilla, when Lynn expresses sympathy for Yomiel, and when he in turn decides to rescue her, that it is possible to turn things around. I could also level surface-level criticism for centering on such well-written police characters that it becomes easy to think that cops are people, but I'll refrain. A much deeper reading into motifs of authority, nationalism, and the criminal justice system in this game would be meaty enough to warrant its own video, and would probably drain a lot of the fun from it. All I'll say here is that I am impressed with the level of nuance given to the subject at hand. Not a lot of police dramas manage the same. The events of the game convey that the law is not always moral and is certainly not infallible. It conveys that police are prone to making mistakes that range from stupid to outright dangerous. It conveys that you shouldn't trust any government. Okay, in all seriousness, it shows us that the power to fix problems, big or small, lies with all of us. Bigger problems just require greater unity. Despite its dealings with the macabre, Ghost Trick is a very optimistic game. It is suspenseful and sometimes sad, but it is all the more brimming with hope. It imagines fate as a yoke that ensnares all of the living, but one which can be broken nonetheless. It encourages players not to take things at face value, but to instead seek solutions to problems that they may have never thought it possible to fix. It's a nostalgic gem in the still more nostalgic collection of games that defined a generation, and I hope that with the port to the Switch and other systems, more people will discover it and feel moved by the happy resolution to a wonderful and unique little story. More than anything, we could stand to learn from it too, that sometimes all it takes to change someone's future is a single act of kindness.